Chapter 1. The Arrival. The regalia, the Earth Federation's pride and flagship, drifted through the cosmic expanse as if it were merely another speck of dust in the void. Yet, for the crew aboard, the ship was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of mankind's growth, a testament to the ambition, resolve, and resilience that had seen humanity rise from the ashes of a dying Earth to conquer the stars. The regalia was the culmination of centuries of scientific advancement, military prowess, and the fierce, unrelenting drive to push boundaries that humans had demonstrated since the beginning of their existence. As it cut its way through the dark corridors of space toward its destination, the crew had no idea that this journey would mark the end of an era of complacency and the beginning of something that would change the balance of power across the galaxy. And now, humanity was supposed to make contact. Not as equals, never that, but as diplomats. The Earth Federation had sent a message, hoping to establish some kind of fragile peace or trade agreement with the Zraltians. It was laughable to many who had studied the species. They didn't negotiate, they devoured. But that was the nature of diplomacy. Or so the higher-ups had said. Roland's hands tightened around the armrests of the chair as he stared at the planet below. It was a cold and desolate world, its surface cracked and broken, littered with scars from centuries of warfare and extreme climates. The Zraltians thrived in such conditions, existing in a state of constant battle, testing their strength against everything that dared challenge them. To think that humanity would be able to sit at a table with these creatures seemed beyond comprehension. Still, the mission was clear, and Roland had long since learned that there was no point in questioning orders. The regalia had arrived in Zralthar's orbit under the guise of peace. His communications officer, Lieutenant Maria Cortez, stood beside him, eyes focused on the various screens that filled the bridge. The hum of the ship's engine was a constant background sound as the crew worked in hushed urgency. She turned to him, her face pale under the harsh lighting, concern written across her features. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission. It's from them." The words hung in the air like a curse. The Zraltians had never reached out to any other species. They didn't communicate, they conquered, they destroyed, and they left nothing but ruin in their wake. Roland exhaled sharply and nodded, his voice steady, despite the growing tension that coiled in his stomach. "Patch it through, Lieutenant." The communication channel hummed to life, and the familiar harsh rasp of a Zraltian voice filled the room, its tone as cold and foreboding as the world below them. It was the voice of their leader, Karzak, the warlord whose legend had been whispered through the galaxy for centuries. His words, though distorted through the translation system, sent a chill down Roland's spine. "You have arrived, humans. Your presence does not surprise us. It has been anticipated. But make no mistake, Commander Sharp, this is not a place for your diplomacy. You are on our ground now, and you will do as we command." The transmission cut off as abruptly as it had started, leaving only silence in its wake. Roland remained still for a long moment, processing the weight of Karzak's words. "Prepare the landing party," he said finally, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. "We'll meet them on their terms, as promised. But don't forget our terms are clear, too." Cortez glanced at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "Do you think we have a chance, Commander? The Zraltians, they're not like the others we've met. We're walking into the lion's den." Roland nodded slowly, his gaze turning back toward the planet. "Sometimes, the only way forward is to face the lion and stare it down. We're not going to back down from this. We've come too far to fail now." The atmosphere on the regalia was thick with the tension of the crew, and as the ship prepared for descent into the atmosphere of Zralthar, Roland felt the weight of history pressing down upon him. No human had ever attempted a mission like this, and there was no guarantee they would succeed. But he had a responsibility to his crew, to the Federation, and to humanity itself. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to see this through. The regalia entered Zralthar's atmosphere, its engines roaring as the massive ship cut through the storm clouds. The ship shuddered from turbulence, and the sharp screech of metal against air rattled through the hull. Roland's heart pounded in his chest as he sat in his command chair, gripping the armrests. The ground beneath them was far less hospitable than Earth. The planet's electromagnetic field created constant interference, and the atmosphere was thick with dust and ionized gases. The temperature outside reached unbearable extremes, and the skies glowed with ominous, fiery streaks from the solar winds. "We're approaching the designated landing zone," Cortez said, her voice sharp with focused concentration. "It's on the edge of their capital city, Varric, a sprawling fortress." Roland exhaled and nodded. "Good. Prepare the team for landing. Everyone else, hold steady." The regalia descended further, and the harsh winds of Zralthar battered the ship, but the vessel held strong. The landing zone was a rocky plateau near the base of a towering mountain range, the jagged peaks rising sharply into the sky. The view from the viewport revealed the stark contrast between Zralthar's beauty and its brutalism, an overwhelming landscape of ruin and desolation, where once proud cities now lay in ruins, remnants of ancient, long-forgotten battles. As the regalia touched down on the rocky surface, the ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics, and the hum of the landing gear whined softly. The air outside was heavy, thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone, the ground beneath the ship's feet crackling with energy. Roland took one final deep breath, bracing himself for what was to come. The ramp descended fully, and a harsh light flooded into the hold, followed by a wave of cold air. Suddenly, a deep growl resonated from the shadows, followed by the echo of heavy footsteps. Out of the dust and smoke, a towering figure emerged. It was a Zraltrian, easily 10 feet tall, with skin like blackened stone and eyes that glowed with molten fury. Its massive frame rippled with muscle, and its jaws were wide with sharpened teeth, a feral grin that could strip a man to the bone with a single snap. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature stopped in its tracks, and, instead of charging forward, it lowered its head, its gaze focused on Roland. Its molten eyes flickered with recognition, and to Roland's shock, the Zraltrian lowered its massive body into a deep bow, one so low that its forehead nearly touched the ground. The entire landing party froze, weapons raised in confusion. Roland's mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. This was not the reaction he had expected from a Zraltrian warrior, especially not one of such size and apparent strength. The creature, which had all the markings of a fearsome predator, now seemed almost reverent submissive, even. The creature remained bowed for a moment longer before standing, its towering form rising with deliberate slowness. It looked at Roland again, and for the first time, there was something in its eyes that was not rage or hunger. There was respect, and something more. "You are the human they speak of," the Zraltrian's voice rumbled, deep and resonant, as though it were shaking the very air. "The one who dared to challenge our ways. You do not fear us." Roland's heart thudded in his chest, and for a long moment, he couldn't speak. He had expected a battle. He had expected death, destruction, and relentless aggression. But here, before him, was something completely unexpected. A creature who should have been an unstoppable force of nature, bowing to him, speaking to him with what could only be described as reverence. Liam's grip tightened around his rifle, but he forced himself to stay calm, to remain focused. Whatever this was, whatever this creature was, it had just changed everything. He stepped forward cautiously, his boots crunching on the rocky surface beneath him. His hand hovered near his sidearm, though his instinct told him there was no immediate threat. The Zraltrian didn't seem hostile, but there was still an undercurrent of danger. Its massive body rippled with muscles beneath the stone-like skin, and its teeth were sharp enough to tear through metal. But its posture, its tone, everything about the creature now seemed strangely deferential. The Zraltrian lifted its head slowly, its molten eyes flickering with an emotion that Roland couldn't quite place. There was a deep, ancient sadness there, mixed with something else, a hint of awe. It took a step back, its massive feet leaving deep indentations in the cracked ground. "You are not like the others," the Zraltrian rumbled, its voice a low, vibrating growl. "Others came before you, soft, weak, eager to submit to our power. You, human, you are different. You challenge us. You do not fear us." Roland's breath caught. The creature was speaking of something beyond just the Federation, something that hinted at the galaxy's complex history with the Zraltians. He glanced back at his crew, their weapons still aimed at the creature, unsure of what to do. The air between them was tense, but the Zraltrian hadn't moved in a threatening manner. It wasn't a trick, Roland realized. The creature truly respected him. The Zraltrian's voice dropped to a near whisper, as though sharing a secret that would change the course of history. "We are warriors by nature, But we have no purpose now. We conquer, we fight, we devour, yet we grow weary. The universe does not offer what it once did. But you, human, you will change this. We will follow you, not as a servant, but as a worthy challenger. You will lead us to something greater. Roland stared at the towering figure in front of him. The sheer absurdity of the situation was almost too much to comprehend. The Zraltians, these terrifying, unstoppable conquerors, were now offering their allegiance to a human. To him, a single human standing on their homeworld, a place where no other species had ever dared to tread. Follow me, Roland repeated, his voice a little incredulous. I'm not a leader. I'm here to dash. You are a leader, the Zraltrian interrupted, its voice firm, a deep rumbling echo that reverberated through Roland's very bones. You do not see it yet, but the challenge you face, it will shape your people. The Zraltians will no longer destroy. We will build. With you. The words hit Roland like a freight train. He had come to this godforsaken planet, this hellhole of a world, to negotiate a fragile peace, hoping to avoid war or worse. But now, it seemed, the universe had another plan for him. It was not peace that awaited him, it was an alliance. An alliance with a species that had destroyed every species it had encountered. And they weren't just offering peace. They were offering power, leadership, and something much more dangerous, trust. The Zraltrian stepped forward, lowering its head again, its molten eyes never leaving Roland's. We bow to you, human, for you will show us a new path. One that does not lead to destruction, but to greatness. The galaxy shall see what humanity is capable of, and they will tremble. Roland swallowed hard. The weight of the Zraltrian's words settled deep in his gut. The implications of what was being asked, of what was being offered, were monumental. He wasn't just standing before a creature of immense power. He was standing before an entire species that saw something in humanity that none of the other galactic civilizations had. Respect, potential, strength. They wanted to follow him, to serve him in a way that defied everything he knew about diplomacy and power. Rise, Roland finally said, his voice steady, though inside, his thoughts raced. I'm no leader. But if this is what you truly want, then we'll do this together. We'll build a future. But I won't lead through fear. If you want to follow, then prove to me that you can stand with us, not above us. The Zraltrian's golden eyes flickered, and for a moment, Roland thought it might question him. But the massive creature only nodded, its head rising once again to its full, terrifying height. It let out a deep, resonating growl of approval that echoed through the desolate terrain. You have our word, human, the Zraltrian rumbled. We will follow you, not as subjects, but as equals. You have passed our test. Chapter 2, The Path Forward. The Zraltians were not just beasts of war. As Roland had quickly learned, they were a species once at the height of their power, now teetering on the brink of extinction due to their own unchecked violence. For centuries, they had torn through the galaxy, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. But what Roland saw now, what he felt in the air between him and the creature before him, was a flicker of hope. This species, this terrifying race of conquerors, was not beyond redemption. They were looking for something to give their lives purpose again. They were willing to follow him. The idea of leading them was absurd, yes, but at the same time, it felt inevitable. Over the next few days, Roland spent hours speaking with the Zraltians, primarily with their leader, Karzak, who had proven to be as strategic and intelligent as he was fearsome. The Zraltians were brutal in combat, yes, but they were also incredibly organized, with an almost military-level discipline when it came to the structure of their society. It was clear that Karzak, though a warrior at heart, had grown weary of the endless cycle of conquest. He was looking for something new, a way to move beyond the cycle of destruction that had defined the Zraltians for centuries. As Roland listened to Karzak and his followers, a plan began to form. Perhaps the Zraltians could become something more than just a force of destruction. With their unmatched strength and military prowess, they could become protectors, enforcers of peace if they could be redirected toward a higher purpose. But that would require not only the Zraltians to change, but also the Federation and the galaxy as a whole to shift their perspective on humanity's place in the universe. The next few days blurred together as Roland worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between humanity and the Zraltians. Karzak and his warriors, though fierce in appearance and nature, showed a deep willingness to listen and adapt to the new reality that Roland was presenting to them. The Zraltians had always viewed themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy, but in the quiet moments between conversations, Roland could see the cracks in their arrogance. They had grown disillusioned with their endless cycle of war and conquest. They had nothing left to fight for, nothing left to conquer. They needed a new purpose, and Roland knew that humanity could provide that purpose, even if he wasn't sure how just yet. For Roland, this was both an opportunity and a tremendous responsibility. He had never been a leader of this magnitude. Leading soldiers, yes, he had done that before. But leading an entire species, an entire race of creatures that had lived in constant warfare for millennia, was a different challenge entirely. It wasn't enough to simply convince them to fight for a new cause. Roland needed to help them rediscover what it meant to be a species of honor, a species that could lead rather than destroy. During their conversations, Karzak would often lean in close, his massive form towering over Roland with eyes full of curiosity and suspicion. "What would you have us do?" the Zraltrian leader asked one evening, his voice low and rumbling like the distant thunder of an approaching storm. "We were born to fight, to devour. It is the only way we have ever known. You ask us to change, but that is no small task. You must show us the way." Roland didn't have an easy answer, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't remain the way they were. If they were to truly serve as protectors instead of destroyers, they would have to find a way to work together not just as humans and Zraltians, but as something greater than the sum of their parts. "The first step," Roland said, his mind working fast, "is to prove that we can work together, to show the galaxy that we're capable of something more. We'll start small. Help protect human colonies under threat. Assist the Federation in their missions. Will be your first test. If we succeed, it will be a message to everyone's Ralther is no longer a place of war. It's a place of unity." Karzak stared at him, unmoving, his molten eyes flickering in the dim light of the war room. "We will fight for you, human, but we will not fight for weakness. If you wish us to follow you, you must show that you have the strength to lead." That challenge, Roland knew, was more than just a test of physical strength. It was a test of leadership, of vision. The Zraltians needed to see that humanity wasn't afraid to stand beside them, to face the universe head-on and prove their worth. Chapter 3, The First Test. Roland stood on the observation deck of the Regalia, staring out at the vast, swirling chaos of the galaxy. The mission ahead was unlike any he had ever faced. The Federation had finally agreed to let the Zraltians accompany them on a joint operation to protect a nearby human colony on the outskirts of Federation space. It was an experimental mission, one that could either solidify humanity's newfound alliance with the Zraltians or lead to a catastrophic failure. The stakes had never been higher. Beside him, Karzak stood tall and imposing, his presence a looming force even in the quiet of the command center. His body was a mass of muscle and stone-like skin, his fiery eyes focused ahead, watching as the final preparations for the mission were made. Behind him, a dozen of his warriors stood in formation, ready for action. They had trained with the Federation forces in simulated environments, but this would be their first real combat scenario as part of a united front. "You have led many battles, human," Karzak rumbled, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "But this is unlike anything you have ever faced. The pirates will test you. They do not fear death. They will test your strength, your resolve." Roland glanced at the towering Zraltrian. "I'm counting on you," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Together, we'll show the galaxy what we're capable of." The Federation fleet, along with the Zraltians, dropped out of FTL travel into the Asterisk 12 system. The scene was one of chaos. The colony's defenses were struggling to hold against the overwhelming pirate assault. The ships in orbit were engaged in a brutal firefight, and the surface of the planet below was burning with the aftermath of bombardments. The pirates, a ruthless and cunning bunch, were known for their ability to overwhelm larger forces with sheer numbers and vicious tactics. But now, with the Zraltians in tow, the odds had shifted. Within minutes, the Zraltians deployed in their massive warships, each one a fortress in space, capable of decimating pirate vessels in seconds. Their ships were unlike anything the Federation had ever seen, primitive in design, yet terrifyingly efficient in combat. They were massive, each one a looming threat in the black void, and their sheer size alone was enough to send the pirates into disarray. But Roland knew that the real battle wasn't in space, it was on the surface. The pirates were already on the ground, occupying key structures in the colony. If they weren't stopped quickly, the entire colony would fall. "Team, get ready. We're going in," Roland said, his voice steady. "Zraltians, follow me. We'll take back Asterisk 12. The Federation and Zraltian forces hit the ground with brutal force, storming the pirate positions with precision. Zraltians led the charge, their massive forms tearing through pirate defenses with terrifying efficiency. Roland watched as they cut through the enemy lines, their ferocity unmatched. The pirates, though heavily armed, stood no chance against the might of the Zraltians. But it wasn't just the Zraltian strength that turned the tide. It was the way they fought, focused, disciplined, working with the Federation forces as one cohesive unit. The pirates' advantage in numbers quickly evaporated as the combined forces of humanity and the Zraltians pushed forward. Every Zraltrian warrior moved with purpose, their movements a perfect display of power and coordination. It was clear now, the Zraltians were not just allies in name, they were comrades in arms, fighting for the same cause. Roland moved alongside them, his hand steady on his blaster as he provided cover for his troops. He couldn't afford to be outshone. He needed to lead by example. They had come together in this fight not as separate forces, but as a unified front. His heart pounded in his chest as they neared the final pirate stronghold. The pirates, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat, their morale shattered. But it wasn't enough to let them escape. Roland and Karzak led the final assault, breaking through the last lines of defense and forcing the pirates to surrender. The battle was won. The Federation soldiers cheered as the last of the pirates were taken into custody, but Roland remained still. He turned to Karzak, who stood with a slight, almost imperceptible smile on his face. "You did it," Roland said, his voice carrying a sense of quiet pride. Karzak nodded, his molten eyes flashing with approval. "We did it, human." Roland looked out at the colony, the fires of battle now extinguishing as peace settled over the land. They had won. Together, the Zraltians had proven themselves, not as conquerors, but as allies, standing side by side with humanity in a fight for survival. The galaxy had seen their power, but now they would see their strength as protectors. The Zraltians had fought like a well-oiled machine, their strength and ferocity unrivaled, but it was their discipline, their coordination with the Federation forces, that had truly turned the tide. Roland couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he watched the Zraltians who had once been known as marauders work alongside his soldiers. They had not only shown their strength, but their willingness to adapt, to follow orders, to stand with humanity. They had proven themselves, not as monsters of war, but as protectors. He turned toward Karzak, who was standing nearby, surveying the destruction with a quiet, almost solemn expression. The Zraltrian's face, usually a mask of intensity, was now softer, reflective. For the first time since they had met, Roland saw something in Karzak's eyes that wasn't just pride or bloodlust, it was something deeper. It was the recognition of something humanity had given them. Purpose. "We did it," Roland said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. Karzak gave a nod, his voice low but resolute. "We did not fight for you, human. We fought with you. This was a test for both of us. The universe will know that we can stand beside you, not as subordinates, but as equals." Roland looked out across the battlefield, his mind racing with the possibilities. What Karzak was saying was profound. The Zraltians were no longer just an overwhelming force of destruction. They had found something to fight for. Something worth protecting. Something that, for the first time in their long history, wasn't just about conquest or survival, it was about unity. The Federation soldiers were slowly beginning to gather in groups, exchanging looks of disbelief and awe. They had witnessed firsthand the strength of the Zraltians and how their power had shifted the balance of the battle. Roland's thoughts turned to the galaxy at large. What would the rest of the universe think when they saw the Zraltians, once the most feared race, fighting alongside humanity as allies? It was an image that had never existed before. "Commander Sharp," Cortez's voice crackled through his communicator, pulling him from his thoughts. "The remaining pirate fleet is regrouping in orbit. It's small, but there's still a threat. We need to deal with them before they launch another attack. Roland's jaw tightened as he gave a sharp nod. Prepare the fleet for action, he said, his voice crisp. We'll end this once and for all. Karzak, who had overheard the transmission, stepped forward. The Zralshans will fight again. We have not finished our task. Karzak seemed to hesitate for a brief moment, the pride in his eyes giving way to something else, perhaps a willingness to adapt further, or maybe a deeper understanding of what Roland was asking. He nodded. As you say, human. Chapter 4, A New Dawn. The final assault came swiftly. With the Federation fleet, bolstered by the firepower of the Zralshans' warships, the remnants of the pirate fleet didn't stand a chance. The battle was short and brutal. The pirates, outclassed and outnumbered, tried to regroup, but their efforts were futile. The Zralshans' ships, with their sheer size and formidable weaponry, made quick work of the pirate vessels, scattering them across the void. The Federation forces held their position, providing strategic support from a distance, while the Zralshans focused on the destruction of the remaining ships. Within hours, the pirate threat was neutralized, and the sky over Asteris 12 was clear. As the Federation ships began the task of securing the space around the colony and preparing for a more permanent presence, Roland turned his attention to the planet's surface. The Zralshans, led by Karzak, were already assisting in the rebuilding efforts. Their strength and size were invaluable in clearing debris and providing security. More importantly, their presence sent a message to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity had forged an alliance with one of the most feared species in existence. And together, they had overcome an impossible threat. A soft beep from his communicator interrupted his thoughts. Cortez's voice came through, smooth and controlled as always. Commander, we've received word from the Federation. A formal announcement is being prepared. The Zralshans will be recognized as allies, no longer the marauding species they once were. This victory, this cooperation will be our message to the galaxy. Roland smiled, but the weight of the responsibility still lay heavy on him. This wasn't just a victory for Earth. It was a victory for the galaxy, a shift in the balance of power that could reverberate for millennia. But it was also just the beginning. The Zralshans' transformation from conquerors to allies would take time, and the Federation's integration of them would require trust, patience, and constant vigilance. But Roland believed in the future they were building. I think we've made history, Roland said, his voice soft but certain. You've made more than history, Commander. Karzak's deep voice responded from behind him. The Zraltrian had entered the room, his massive frame filling the doorway. You've given us a future. Roland turned to face him, his eyes meeting Karzak's molten gaze. The Zraltrian stood tall, his stone-like skin glimmering in the dim light of the room. There was no longer any trace of the rage or destruction that had once defined his species. In its place was something new, something stronger. Together, Roland said, his voice resolute, we'll build that future. And as Karzak nodded, the weight of their words settled between them. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, battles to fight, trust to build, and the difficult task of proving to the galaxy that a conqueror could become a protector. But they were no longer enemies, no longer predators and prey. They were allies. And as allies, they would shape the future of the galaxy, one step at a time. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, but now, they would see. Humans, and their allies, were a force to be reckoned with.